Welcome to the stage of history retold.
Greetings everyone, and as you can see I am here today not in Tekken actually, but in another fighting game developed by Namco, which is SOULCALIBUR, in this case specifically SOULCALIBUR VI. And I am hoping to kind of like persuade a couple of you who are Tekken fans to give this game a try. If you really like Tekken, specifically, out of all fighting games, you have very little kind of like options when it comes to branching out. If you want to branch out to 2D fighters, let's say like Street Fighter or something similar, you're gonna have to kind of like abandon a lot of the things that you learned with Tekken. For example, in those games, jumping is a great deal. And of course we kind of like substitute jumping with sidestepping, which I kind of like want to make a video about. But when you play SOULCALIBUR, you're going to have a significant advantage because both games are developed by Namco and they share a lot. And they're of course both 3D games and they share a lot of similarities. For example, you're used to the high, mid, low dynamic from Tekken, and it's the same here. Whereas in 2D fighters you're going to have like overheads and whatever. There's a difference between ducking and duck blocking. SOULCALIBUR is a much easier game for you to approach if you come from a Tekken background. Sadly, this game, like, it's definitely successful. It has a strong kind of like competitive scene, especially in the US, also in Europe, especially in France. Like, people love their SOULCALIBUR. But it kind of like doesn't have the same attention, and Tekken doesn't have the same popularity. And I am hoping to kind of like maybe shed a little more light on this game. As you can see, it is gorgeous in the kind of like presentation department. It is not lacking at all behind Tekken. I would even argue that it's a better looking game than Tekken. But without further ado, I'm going to kind of like name a couple of points that make SOULCALIBUR very, very much worth trying, and in some areas, at least in my mind, actually superior to Tekken, especially when it comes, of course, to gameplay. So with that, let's begin. So number one is movement. While movement in Tekken requires rocket science while doing brain surgery, yes, I am quoting Frame Whisperer here, you have to do this kind of like Korean backdash motion, which like I'm going to talk about that definitely sometime in the future. But here movement is very intuitive. You don't need to do anything special. Hold back, your character goes back. Hold forward, your character immediately starts running. Hold up back, your character moves diagonally. Sidestepping, you do that with a single button press. You don't have to press up, up, up or something like that. And of course all of that at the cost of like blocking with a button. But I'm going to get to that like shortly. So movement is very intuitive. It's not rocket science. When a game really wants you to move sideways, which again I'm going to talk about when it comes to Tekken, like there's a lot of kind of like inconsistencies and strange stuff going on with Tekken sidestepping that I'm going to address in a further video. But like here, movement is very intuitive. You can move in any which way you want. It's called 8-way run in this game, and the game clearly kind of like tells you like, yeah, I want you to move around. You gain a lot of things by movement, and it's not difficult to acquire. You don't need to like learn Korean backdashing, wave dashing, or any of that stuff. And it places kind of like a further emphasis on positioning in the stage, which I'm going to talk about that shortly in a second. Button layout is also very consistent. Like in Tekken you have limb, parallel, or whatever it's called. You know, 1 is left punch, 2 is right punch. Here you have 1, or in this case we call it A, is always a horizontal attack. So this is going to catch people stepping. And B is always going to be a vertical attack. And they're generally going to be mids, which are going to catch your opponent, ducking of course. And K's, which is, well, 4, or let's say circle if you're on PlayStation, is generally a kick, which is going to be your quickest attack for 99% of the cast. So also kind of like button layout is not very difficult. In Tekken, like, oh, what's my character's homing move, whatever. Here we don't have homing moves really. Like any move done with the A is going to be practically a homing move. Some characters kind of like their A doesn't go all the way. For example, see here like Siegfried, his A kind of like only covers his left side. But this is like a much less important detail. So if you want to get into this game, especially if you come from a Tekken background, you will actually find it easier, especially in the department of movement and kind of like overall understanding the button layout and what each thing does. Number 2 is the 3D aspect of this game is very fleshed out, very consistent, and doesn't lead to any inconsistencies. What do I mean by that? If you haven't watched my video on the Tekken 7 kind of like critique of the 3D system of that game, I recommend you do. But short version of which is there are a lot of kind of like weird things that happen once you get your opponent's side. Counter hits no longer work in Tekken. If you launch your opponent, you have to do weird off-axis wonky combos that you're not used to and your character could suck at. You might not get your preferred ender depending on who you're playing. Your throw game is nerfed if you really are playing a grappler, so on and so forth. Almost none of that exists here in Soul Calibur. I don't care how you launch your opponent, your combos are the exact same. Counter hits, lethal hits, whatever, all of that, everything still works. You're clearly encouraged to step, and combating, stepping, and kind of like playing around the 3D movement of the game is very intuitive and easy. It's not going to take rocket science kind of like certificates for you to figure out, oh, where does this move track? Do I step here? Do I step there? Is it better to sidestep or sidewalk? None of that really exists. This is further reflected. Of course, like I said, all A's are horizontal attacks which track. Now, most of them are going to be highs, some of which are going to be mids, but like, you will get the hang of it in no time. This is further reflected in the stage design. For example, in this game, and there used to be in previous games, but no more in Tekken in Soul Calibur 6, there are no more infinite stages. You have only one and you have access to it in practice mode, if I'm talking about this version of the game, of course. Whereas in Tekken, infinite stages exist and they are a hard counter to a lot of characters. There are many characters that kind of like clearly, there are a clear disadvantage when you're on an infinite stage. For example, Falconman, the character that was latest released for Tekken 7 at the time of this recording. So here, the kind of like the design of the 3D is really reflected in the stages because you have ring outs. You can ring your opponent out of the stage. For example, if I do this, I win the round automatically, not the entire match, but the round. And this really adds to the depth. Of course, you have a lot of stages with walls. You can use walls to extend combos just like you do in Tekken. You have low walls, which you can either wall splat your opponent at like that, or you can even kind of like ring out over them. If you do something specific, like this Flapjack from Siegfried here. Some characters are super good at ringing out, of course, at the cost of being horrible at other things. For example, Siegfried here can ring you out to his right, can ring you out to his left, he can ring you back, and he can, of course, ring you out forward. So this really adds to the balance, and every character has access to it, and nobody kind of like, you can't counter pick a character by simply picking an infinite stage and whatnot. So the 3D aspect of this game is very well fleshed out, and it's not going to give you any headaches to try and learn it. Number 3, there is a very good universal kind of like system or defense mechanic that every character has access to, which is GI, this thing here. That is a fantastic addition to the game, and it really benefits the kind of like 3D fighting game kind of like environment or system. In Tekken, every single character has access to low parry, for example, which kind of like normalizes punishing lows across the entire cast. Even if your character sucks at while standing punishment and you don't get a lot of things from it, you can replace your low blocks with low parries, and that way you get an automatic combo on your opponent whenever he does a low, or whenever you actually hard read his low. Whereas one of the things you suffer against is kind of like dealing with constant kind of like pressure and mix-ups up close. If you're facing a Nina, if you're facing a Hwoarang or something similar, they're constantly in your face with plus frames. You don't know how to get out of that, because not every character has a counter, not every character has a parry, a sabaki, whatever you want to call it. Here you get something very different, which is guard impact. For example, this string from Nightmare, it's double vertical. I can, of course, step the second hit, whatever, but there's another option, which is this, guard impact. On guard impact, you don't get anything guaranteed on your opponent, because depending on what you choose to do afterwards, they can either step it, they can either block it, they can duck it, but for the most part they're going to be locked at a severe kind of like frame disadvantage, but they can always GI you back. What this actually creates, of course, first of all, if you're facing someone who's constantly in your face, of course, Siegfried is not the best kind of like example of this, nor is Nightmare here on the right. But if I face something like a Maxi, a Talem, a character that's super kind of like in your face, kind of like pressure happy, you can always count on slowing down their game by implementing GIs to take your turn back. This, in fact, opens up the room for slower attacks like this, like even if it's not a break attack like that, because this one completely nullifies a normal GI. Of course, we now have this resist impact, but that's like beside the point. But slower attacks like this one would generally be useless in Tekken. Something like this would generally be absolutely useless, but because of the system in this game, if you're constantly pressuring your opponent and he starts guard impacting you, this kind of like opens you up to doing AA or something quick and then doing something slow. His GI whiffs and you punish him after his GI is concluded. So this opens up room for slower movements, for slower moves that are generally absolutely horrendously useless in Tekken. They just occupy the move list kind of like almost needlessly. So GI, it never gives you anything guaranteed. It deepens the mind game. It gives you a universal tool for dealing with pressure. So characters who are super kind of like in your face and sticky are a little bit less effective, or they have deeper mind games behind their offense. And it really, really benefits the overall system of the game, because it opens up kind of like the route for slower moves that would otherwise be useless because they're so slow, and so on and so forth. So characters in this game are a little bit more easy to understand in terms of their purpose and how they're supposed to be played. You don't really have you kind of like have a full-fledged training system or training mode in the kind of like Libra of Souls or whatever. Characters have kind of like explanations as to how they're supposed to be played. The move lists are better structured. For example, if I check out my move list of Siegfried here, where is it? It's supposed to come up any second now. Main attacks. It shows you not just like all the attacks listed chaotically as you do in Tekken. It shows you each and every attack and with its purpose. For example, here it says long reaching, it says easily dodges vertical attacks, easily hits moving opponents, which is kind of like their way of saying it tracks. On top of that, if you come from Tekken, of course you're super familiar with counter hits. This attack from Siegfried, for example, normally doesn't do much, but if you counter hit your opponent out of something, it gives you a full launch as you do in Tekken, and it gives you fantastic damage. Well, that's one thing. You also have something called lethal hits, which is this here, and of course you have them listed for each and every character. And if you use the move at its super kind of like intended purpose, it gives you further and better rewards. For example, Siegfried here has this stance which automatically parries horizontal attacks, and he has this attack from it, which is of course a launcher. But if I actually parry something with this and I capitalize on it with that attack, the launching animation changes and it gives me even a higher or bigger launch, as you can see here. So the lethal hits, they kind of like add to like the understanding of the character. Like, okay, this is your block punisher, this is kind of like your tracking move, this is your whiff punisher, whatever, so on and so forth. And the game kind of like makes it a little bit more clear for you. It's still not as good as a full-on kind of like training mode, but you're going to have an easier time getting into characters in this game as compared to Tekken. This game has a better version, in my opinion, than Rage in Tekken. Ares would heavily disagree on every single kind of like opportunity he had to talk about SOULCALIBUR V and SOULCALIBUR VI. He mentions how much he hates the reverse Rage mechanic. I believe it's called Grit or something. You see the life bars up on the screen. There is kind of like a divider at kind of like the 30% mark. And once your life gets below that, in Tekken you get Rage. Once you get access to Rage in Tekken, of course, you get access to higher damage on your attacks, and you get access to 2 additional attacks in the form of Rage Art and Rage Drive. So if your opponent's health is 40%, and you have the opportunity to hit him with like a Punisher that's going to put them at exactly, let's say, 29% health, you're going to make the matchup worse for you, because you're now giving them access to two of their best moves. Well, not always, let's say, Rage Art, but Rage Drive is usually so good that the character is designed to like have access to it only once per round. So it's almost in your disadvantage to damage your opponent. It's much better to like look for a launch that would end the round here and there without having to deal with their rage. Whereas in this game there's something different. Once you put your opponent in that reverse rage state, they start taking less damage. And that's almost it. Like, you don't give them that much options. It just kind of like encourages you to like be a little bit more aggressive on them. Aris really hates this. He kind of like always says like that's the whole point of putting your opponent in low health, is because the kind of like the even the stubbiest and the least damaging attack, even a poke, is going to be fatal, which is going to kind of like add to the pressure you have on them. But putting your opponent in rage and giving them access to new moves, which they can in turn use to launch you and end your round with, is way worse than just like making your opponent take a little bit less damage. And you can still, of course, ring them out, you can still combo them, and moves that do high damage will not get their damage scaled. So one could argue that no kind of like special treatment for low health opponents is going to be best. But if you're going to have something, I believe this reverse rage mechanic is going to be much better than something like a full-fledged rage in Tekken, where the character gets access to more damage on you, and kind of like, because that one really kind of like favors YOLO hop kicks, you know? Once you see like a character put in low health, they start getting like reckless with hop kicks and electrics and whatever, because like, what the hell, if it launches, if I get the launch, I will likely kill you even if you have like 50% life lead over me, especially in the case of Paul and characters who are similar to that. Whereas here, you're not at a severe disadvantage if you put your opponent in grit. This kind of like gives them a little bit of a comeback factor, but they're still kind of like sloppy enough to eat a super slow move like this one, for example. You're still going to get the full damage on them, and you're still going to kill them. So in my opinion, in my book, many might disagree, but I actually think the reverse rage system is much better than rage in Tekken. And the final point I'm going to make in favor of this game, even though it is kind of like a catchy term that a lot of people use without really kind of like caring about it all that much, is it is the best footsie game, in my opinion, out there. Nobody talks about SOULCALIBUR when it comes to this aspect, you know, footsies, what's that? Like, whenever people talk about footsies, they talk about like maybe Street Fighter, maybe they say Tekken is super footsies. This game, like, it destroys Tekken in terms of footsies. Because like I said, movement is super intuitive. There is no kind of like rocket science behind it. You can easily and intuitively move in whichever direction you want. You can easily sidestep a vertical attack and whiff punish it. You can easily backdash out of something and whiff punish it. And knowing frames, I'm not saying it's useless. You certainly, if you want to be good and super good at this game, it is much beneficial to you to know frames, but there's a far less emphasis on it. Like, especially if you're not playing something like these two, Nightmare and Siegfried, you can kind of like get away with punishing everything with AA. You can kind of like go away with punishing every block low with the same attack. The game is far less mix-up heavy. For example, Siegfried doesn't really have a 50-50 outside of this stance here, where he has access to a launching low and a launching mid, and he only has access to it from stance. Many other characters kind of like share this. There's not really a real 50-50 unless you're in a very specific situation. And the roster is overall smaller, so learning matchups is a lot more manageable. So this game really kind of like makes it obvious that this is what we want. We want you to really assess the range of your attacks much more than the frames of them, let's say. And kind of like look for whiff punishes. AGA is super difficult to pull off. Look for whiff punishes, walk away from range of attacks, you know, sidestep something. It's very clear. And it's the best interpretation or implementation of such a system, far better in my opinion than Tekken, because of all the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, I'm not going to say that the game is completely without problems. For example, this reversal edge mechanic, we don't really like that much. It was introduced in this game, was supposed to be like super cinematic, whatever. It locks you into a pseudo rock, paper, scissors dynamic. If you understand the system well enough, it's going to be far less intimidating. Even if your opponent catches you in a reversal edge, it doesn't mean that they get damage on you. They can actually get unlucky and you get damage on them. If you block in it, you can negate 70% of the options. You can hard read and launch your opponent if you know what they're going to do. You can kind of like bait the animation out and lethal hit it with a break attack. You can step around it. There are a lot of characters who have a lot of ways of dealing with it, but overall it's not welcome. The second thing I might say in disfavor of this game is that the cast is a little bit further apart. What I mean by that is that in Tekken there are very few kind of like exceptions to the rules. Almost each and every character has access to a 10-frame jab. Let's say, with the exception of Asuka and well, Asuka has a 10-frame jab, but it's super horrible. Ganryu doesn't have that. You always have access to a 13-frame to a 14-frame mid-poke, be it a down forward 1, down forward 4, back 3, whatever. You have low pokes, you can kind of like launch at 15 from standing, you can launch at 15 from crouching. There's a little bit less of that here. Like, a lot of characters are way kind of like deviating from... There is no real, let's say, typical or super generic SOULCALIBUR character. It exists to a far lesser extent in this game than it does in Tekken. But because the roster is much smaller, you're not going to find it an impossible task to keep up. You might have to visit practice mode every now and then, you might have to kind of like dive a little bit deeper into the frames, but without feeling that much huge of a pressure to do so. So yeah, I believe this is SOULCALIBUR, and I really hope that you can give it a try. It's going to be fun, I promise you, especially if you come from Tekken, because you're going to have a lot easier time here, and a lot more interesting time in this game, as opposed to like branching out into, let's say, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Dragon Ball FighterZ, whatever have you, you know. Because this is still developed by Namco, it kind of like shares a lot of like the core mechanics with Tekken. You're going to have an advantage if you come here from Tekken as opposed to another game. And like I said, there are a lot of like superior systems here that really deserve you to kind of like take a look at and visit, even try once in a while. So maybe pick it up if it's on sale. I don't know, maybe try it at a friend's house. I don't know what you're gonna do, but like, give this game a try. I think there's a very good chance that you might actually like it. So, with that being said, thank you all for watching, take care, and goodbye.